The autumn wind whipped across the Naval Academy courtyard as Sarah Mitchell stepped out of the black sedan that had brought her from the train station. Her worn duffel bag slung over one shoulder, she took a deep breath and surveyed the imposing brick buildings that would be her home for the next 4 years. At 19, she looked younger than most incoming plebes, her petite frame and soft features giving her an almost delicate appearance that belied the steel beneath. "You sure this is where you want to be dropped off, miss?" the driver asked, eyeing the intimidating military institution with obvious concern. "This is perfect, thank you," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the butterflies dancing in her stomach. She handed him a tip and watched as the sedan disappeared through the academy gates, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the weight of the secret she carried. The courtyard buzzed with activity as upperclassmen moved with purpose between buildings, their uniforms crisp and their bearing unmistakably military. Sarah had studied the academy's traditions and protocols extensively, but being here in person felt entirely different. She was no stranger to military environments, but this particular setting required a performance she'd never attempted before. "Hey, you lost?" a voice called out behind her. Sarah turned to see 3 male cadets approaching, their second-year insignia marking them as clearly more experienced than she was supposed to be. The one in the center, tall and broad-shouldered with perfectly styled blonde hair, wore an expression of casual superiority that she recognized immediately. His name tag read Bradley. "I'm looking for Bancroft Hall," Sarah said, deliberately allowing a slight tremor into her voice. "I think I'm supposed to report there for processing." Bradley exchanged glances with his companions, both of whom seemed eager to follow his lead. "Bancroft Hall? You mean the dormitory?" He looked her up and down with obvious skepticism. "You're one of the new plebes." "Yes, sir," Sarah responded, remembering the proper protocol for addressing upperclassmen. Well, Bradley said, his tone taking on a mocking edge. "Looks like they're really scraping the bottom of the barrel this year. What's your name, plebe?" "Sarah Mitchell, sir." "Sarah Mitchell," Bradley repeated slowly, as if testing how the name sounded. "Tell me, Mitchell, what makes you think you belong here? You look like you'd have trouble opening a pickle jar, let alone handling the physical demands of naval training." The other 2 cadets snickered, clearly enjoying the show. Sarah had encountered this type countless times before. Young men drunk on their small amount of power, eager to establish dominance over anyone they perceived as weak. In her previous life, she would have handled this situation very differently. But Sarah Mitchell, incoming plebe, needed to react as expected. "I know I don't look like much, sir," she said, allowing her shoulders to slump slightly. "But I'm willing to work hard. I want to serve my country." "Work hard." Bradley stepped closer, invading her personal space in a calculated move of intimidation. "Do you have any idea what kind of work we do here? This isn't summer camp, sweetheart. This is the United States Naval Academy, where we train future officers of the world's most powerful navy." Sarah nodded earnestly, playing her part perfectly. "I understand, sir. I'll do whatever it takes." "Whatever it takes," Bradley mused. "That's cute. Really cute." He gestured to his companions. "This is Johnson and Martinez. We're second-year cadets, which means we've survived what you're about to go through. And let me tell you, most people who look like you don't make it past the first month." Johnson, a lanky redhead with pale skin and nervous energy, stepped forward. "Maybe we should help her find her way, Bradley. Orient her to how things work around here." "Good thinking, Johnson," Bradley said with a predatory smile. "Consider this your first unofficial lesson, Mitchell. At this academy, there's a hierarchy. Those of us who've proven ourselves deserve respect from those who haven't. And you, my dear, are about as unproven as they come." Sarah fought the urge to smile. If only they knew exactly how proven she actually was. Instead, she nodded again, her expression appropriately intimidated. "I understand, sir. Do you?" Martinez chimed in. He was shorter than the other 2, but compensated with an aggressive demeanor that reminded Sarah of small dogs that bark the loudest. Because understanding and accepting are 2 different things. Some people come here thinking they're going to change the rules, challenge the system. Those people usually find themselves washing out pretty quickly. I'm not here to challenge anything, Sarah assured them. I just want to learn. Good, Bradley said, his tone suggesting he was doing her a tremendous favor. Because we're going to teach you. Consider us your unofficial mentors. We'll make sure you understand exactly where you fit in the pecking order. The irony wasn't lost on Sarah. These three had no idea they were speaking to someone who had completed some of the most grueling training the military had to offer. She had survived Hell Week, advanced combat training, and missions that would give these cadets nightmares. But here, she was just another scared plebe who needed their guidance. Now, Bradley continued, let's get you to Bancroft Hall. But first, you need to learn the proper way to carry yourself. Drop that bag. Sarah hesitated for a moment, then set her duffel bag on the ground. No, 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 Johnson said with exaggerated frustration. Drop it properly, like you mean it. Everything you do here should be crisp, military. Try again. Sarah picked up the bag and dropped it again, this time with more force. Better, Martinez nodded approvingly. See, she can learn. Now, pick it up and let's move. As they walked across the courtyard, Bradley kept up a steady stream of commentary designed to establish his authority and highlight Sarah's supposed inadequacies. You see those buildings over there? That's where the real training happens. Combat simulations, weapons training, tactical exercises. Think you can handle that kind of intensity? I hope so, sir, Sarah replied. Hope's not enough here, Bradley said firmly. You need certainty, confidence. Right now, you're projecting weakness, and that's going to make things very difficult for you. They passed groups of other cadets, some of whom looked over with mild interest at the obvious hazing taking place. Sarah noted the dynamics at play. The way some cadets averted their eyes, not wanting to get involved, while others watched with the kind of casual cruelty that came from remembering their own difficult beginnings. Tell us about yourself, Mitchell, Johnson said as they approached the imposing entrance to Bancroft Hall. What's your background? What makes you think you can cut it here? Sarah had prepared for this question extensively. Her cover story was simple and believable. I grew up in Ohio, sir. My father was in the Army, stationed overseas a lot. I spent most of my childhood on military bases. Military brat, Martinez said with a nod. That explains why you're not running away screaming yet. But being around the military and being in the military are completely different things. I know that, sir. That's why I'm here to learn. Bradley stopped walking and turned to face her directly. Here's the thing, Mitchell. You seem nice enough, and I appreciate your attitude. But this place is going to test you in ways you can't imagine. Physical challenges that will push your body to its limits. Mental pressure that will make you question everything about yourself. Leadership scenarios where people's lives depend on your decisions. He paused dramatically, clearly enjoying his role as the wise upperclassman imparting crucial knowledge to the naive newcomer. Most people who look like you, who seem as soft as you do, they don't make it. They wash out, go back to civilian life, maybe join some easier branch of the service. There's no shame in that. But there is shame, Johnson added, in taking up a spot that could have gone to someone more qualified. Someone who actually has what it takes. Sarah felt a familiar surge of competitive fire, the same feeling that had driven her through the most challenging moments of her actual military career. But she kept it carefully hidden, maintaining her facade of uncertain determination. I want to try, she said quietly. Even if I fail, I want to know I tried. That's actually not a bad attitude, Bradley admitted, though he didn't seem entirely pleased to give her even that small amount of credit. Trying is the first step, but trying isn't enough. You need to be smart about how you approach this. They reached the entrance to Bancroft Hall, where other new plebes were lined up for processing. Sarah could see the mixture of excitement and terror on their faces, remembering her own first day of military training years ago. Of course, that had been a very different kind of training for a very different purpose. Listen carefully, Mitchell, Bradley said, lowering his voice as if sharing classified information. The next few weeks are going to be brutal. The upperclassmen are going to push you harder than you've ever been pushed. They're going to look for any sign of weakness, any excuse to make an example out of you. Your best bet, Martinez added, is to keep your head down, follow orders exactly, and don't try to stand out. Standing out is bad when you're a plebe. It attracts attention you don't want. Sarah almost laughed at that advice. In her real military experience, standing out through excellence was exactly what had advanced her career. But she nodded seriously, as if absorbing this wisdom. "We'll be watching your progress," Johnson said, "checking in from time to time to see how you're adapting. If you're smart, you'll take advantage of that. Having upperclassmen who are willing to guide you is a privilege not everyone gets." "Thank you, sir," Sarah said with apparent gratitude. "I really appreciate you taking the time to help me." Bradley smiled, clearly pleased with himself. "Don't thank us yet. Thank us when you make it through your first month." If you make it through your first month. As Sarah joined the line of new plebes, she could hear the 3 cadets discussing her behind her back. Their words carried easily in the crisp autumn air. "Think she'll last?" Johnson asked. "Not a chance," Martinez replied. "Give her 2 weeks, tops. She's too soft." "I don't know," Bradley said thoughtfully. "She's got that military brat background. Sometimes they surprise you. But you're probably right. She doesn't have the look of someone who can handle real pressure." Sarah smiled to herself as she moved forward in line. If only they knew what real pressure actually looked like. If only they knew that the person they just dismissed as weak and soft had completed training that would leave them curled up in a corner begging for mercy. But they would find out eventually. Sarah's mission here wasn't just to complete her academy education. It was to test new training protocols and assessment methods that could revolutionize how the military identified and developed elite operators. Her presence here was part of a classified program designed to study excellence undercover. For now, though, she was just Sarah Mitchell, scared plebe who needed their protection and guidance. And she intended to play that role perfectly until the moment came to reveal who she really was. The line moved forward, and Sarah stepped closer to beginning her new double life at the Naval Academy, where she would pretend to struggle with challenges she'd already mastered while secretly observing and evaluating the very people who thought they were teaching her. 3 weeks into her academy experience, Sarah had settled into a comfortable routine of calculated mediocrity. She performed well enough to avoid remedial training, but poorly enough to maintain her cover as someone struggling to adapt. Her room in Bancroft Hall was Spartan, but functional, shared with a roommate named Jessica, who genuinely was having the difficulties Sarah only pretended to face. "I don't think I can do this anymore," Jessica whispered one evening as they lay in their narrow bunks after lights out. "Today's physical training session nearly killed me. I couldn't even complete half the exercises." Sarah turned toward her roommate's bunk, keeping her voice low to avoid detection by the roving duty officers. "You're getting stronger every day. I can see the difference from when we started." "You think so?" Jessica's voice carried a note of desperate hope. "Because I feel like I'm getting worse. Today during the rope climb, I couldn't even make it halfway up before my arms gave out. Meanwhile, you're improving so much faster than I am." That was a problem Sarah had been working to manage. Despite her best efforts to appear struggling, her natural abilities kept showing through. Muscle memory from years of elite training made even her deliberately poor performances look effortless compared to the genuine struggles of her classmates. "I think you're being too hard on yourself," Sarah said carefully. "We're all adapting at different speeds." Before Jessica could respond, the door to their room burst open without warning. Bradley stood in the doorway, flanked by Johnson and Martinez, all 3 wearing the kind of expressions that meant trouble for plebes. "Mitchell, on your feet now," Bradley barked. Sarah rolled out of bed immediately, standing at attention in her regulation sleepwear. Jessica scrambled to follow suit, clearly panicked by the sudden intrusion. "Did I say both of you?" Bradley's voice cut through the darkness. "I said Mitchell. You." He pointed at Jessica. "Back in your rack." Jessica quickly climbed back in her bunk, pulling her blanket up to her chin and trying to make herself invisible. Sarah remained standing, waiting for whatever test or humiliation these 3 had planned for her. "Get dressed," Martinez ordered. "Vete gear. You have 2 minutes." Sarah moved quickly, but not too quickly, maintaining the illusion that urgency was challenging for her. She pulled on her physical training uniform while the three upperclassmen watched with predatory attention. "Time," Johnson announced, though Sarah was certain she'd been well under the 2-minute limit. "Not bad, Mitchell," Bradley said with grudging approval. "You're getting faster at following orders. But speed in dressing isn't the same as speed in thinking or moving. Tonight, we're going to test whether you've learned anything useful during your time here." They marched her through the darkened corridors of Bancroft Hall, their footsteps echoing off the polished floors. Other plebes peered out of their rooms as they passed, grateful that someone else was receiving the attention of the upperclassmen. "Where are we going?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew. "The gymnasium," Bradley replied. "It's time for a practical evaluation of your progress. We've been watching you, Mitchell, and we've noticed some inconsistencies." Sarah's pulse quickened slightly. Had she made a mistake? Revealed too much capability during training? She'd been so careful to calibrate her performance. But perhaps these three were more observant than she'd credited them with. They entered the gymnasium through a side door that Bradley had apparently arranged to have unlocked. The vast space was lit only by emergency lighting, casting long shadows across the exercise equipment and creating an appropriately dramatic atmosphere for whatever they had planned. "Here's the situation, Mitchell," Bradley began, his voice taking on a formal tone as if he were briefing a military operation. "We've been assigned to evaluate your readiness for advanced training, specifically your physical capabilities and your ability to perform under pressure. Some of our instructors," Johnson added, "have noticed that your performance has been variable. Sometimes you struggle with basic exercises. Other times you seem to execute them with unusual competence." Martinez stepped forward with a clipboard, playing the role of official recorder. "Tonight's evaluation will help us understand where you truly stand, whether you're improving as rapidly as we hope, or whether there are fundamental limitations that suggest you might be better suited for a different path." Sarah nodded seriously, though internally she was calculating the best way to handle this unexpected development. She needed to maintain her cover while not performing so poorly that they recommended her for remedial training, or worse, suggested she consider leaving the academy. "What kind of evaluation?" she asked. Bradley smiled, and there was something unsettling about the expression. "A comprehensive one. We're going to run you through a series of challenges designed to test every aspect of your current capabilities. Physical strength, endurance, agility, and mental resilience." He gestured toward a section of the gymnasium where they had apparently set up an obstacle course using various pieces of equipment. Sarah could see rope climbs, balance beams, wall climbs, and several other challenges that would require significant athletic ability to complete successfully. "The good news," Johnson said with mock reassurance, "is that this is just for evaluation purposes. Your performance tonight won't officially count toward your academic standing. The bad news," Martinez continued, "is that if we determine you're not progressing adequately, we'll be recommending additional remedial training that will make your life considerably more difficult." Sarah surveyed the course they'd constructed, quickly analyzing the most efficient approach to each obstacle. Then she caught herself and forced her expression to show appropriate concern and uncertainty. "I'll do my best," she said. "Your best," Bradley repeated thoughtfully. "That's exactly what we want to see. Your absolute best effort. No holding back, no excuses, no pleading for special consideration. We want to see who Sarah Mitchell really is," Johnson added with emphasis that suggested deeper meaning. They positioned her at the starting line of their makeshift obstacle course. Sarah took a deep breath, settling into the familiar mental state she'd learned during her actual military training. The key would be performing well enough to show improvement and capability while still maintaining enough apparent struggle to preserve her cover. "First challenge," Bradley announced, "is a basic fitness circuit. Push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups, and a timed run. Standard academy requirements, but we want to see your maximum performance, not just passing grades." Sarah began with push-ups, deliberately allowing her form to be slightly imperfect while still demonstrating solid capability. She could feel the three upperclassmen watching her every movement, analyzing her technique, and counting her repetitions. Interesting, Martinez murmured to his companions. Her form is actually quite good, better than most plebes at this stage. Keep going, Mitchell, Bradley encouraged. Don't pace yourself. We want to see your limits. Sarah continued through the circuit, carefully modulating her performance. During sit-ups, she allowed herself to show genuine strain while still completing more repetitions than she'd managed during official evaluations. For pull-ups, she demonstrated improved technique, but stopped short of revealing her actual capabilities. Not bad, Johnson admitted as she completed the final exercise. Definitely showing improvement from your initial assessment. Now the fun part, Bradley said, gesturing toward the obstacle course. This will test your agility, problem-solving, and determination. Some of these obstacles will push you beyond what you've encountered in regular training. Sarah approached the first obstacle, a rope climb that required her to reach a target 20 feet above the ground. She'd mastered this particular challenge years ago during her initial SEAL training, but Sarah Mitchell, struggling plebe, would need to make it look difficult. She began climbing, deliberately using less efficient techniques, and allowing herself to pause midway as if gathering strength. The rope felt familiar in her hands, and she had to consciously suppress the muscle memory that wanted to carry her smoothly to the top. Come on, Mitchell, Bradley shouted from below. Don't give up. Push through the burn. Sarah forced herself to show visible strain as she continued climbing, finally reaching the target and ringing the bell that marked successful completion. She descended more quickly than she'd climbed, another small inconsistency that she hoped wouldn't be too obvious. Better than expected, Martinez noted on his clipboard. She's definitely stronger than she initially appeared. The next obstacle was a balance beam that required crossing while carrying a weighted pack. Sarah approached it with appropriate caution, knowing that this challenge would test her ability to appear less coordinated than she actually was. She mounted the beam carefully, taking deliberate steps that looked uncertain while maintaining the control necessary to avoid actually falling. Halfway across, she allowed herself to wobble slightly, then recovered with what appeared to be determination rather than trained balance. Steady, Johnson called out. Trust your training. Sarah continued across the beam, completing the challenge, but making it look like a near thing. She could see the three upperclassmen exchanging glances, clearly reassessing their initial impressions of her capabilities. The pattern continued through the remaining obstacles. Wall climbs that she made looked challenging while executing with solid technique. Agility drills where she demonstrated improvement while still appearing to work harder than necessary. Mental challenges where she showed good problem-solving skills without revealing the tactical thinking that was second nature to her. Final challenge, Bradley announced as they reached the end of the course. This one isn't about physical ability. It's about mental toughness and integrity. He led her to a corner of the gymnasium where they'd set up what appeared to be an interrogation scenario. A single chair sat under a bright lamp, surrounded by the three upperclassmen who now looked more serious than they had all evening. Sit, Martinez ordered. Sarah took the chair, maintaining her posture despite the obvious attempt to create an intimidating atmosphere. This was territory she knew well, though from the other side of the equation. Here's the situation, Mitchell, Bradley began, his voice taking on a cold, official tone. We've been observing you for weeks. We've seen inconsistencies in your performance that suggest you might not be what you appear to be. Sarah kept her expression neutral, though she felt a familiar spike of adrenaline. Had her cover been blown? Were they somehow aware of her real identity and background? Sometimes you struggle with basic exercises, Johnson continued, showing exactly the kind of difficulty we'd expect from someone with your supposed background. But other times you demonstrate skills and capabilities that suggest much more extensive training. Tonight's evaluation, Martinez added, consulting his clipboard, confirms our suspicions. You're holding back. You're not showing us your true capabilities. Bradley leaned forward, invading her personal space in a calculated intimidation tactic. The question is why? Are you sandbagging to avoid additional responsibilities? Trying to stay under the radar? Or is there something else you're not telling us? Sarah met his gaze steadily, drawing on her interrogation resistance training while maintaining her character. I don't understand what you mean. I've been doing my best in all my training. Your best, Johnson repeated skeptically. That rope climb tonight was significantly better than your performance during official evaluations. Your technique was more advanced. Your strength endurance was superior. That doesn't happen by accident. I've been practicing, Sarah said simply, working extra hours in the gym when I can. I know I started behind everyone else, so I've been trying to catch up. Martinez made a note on his clipboard. Extra practice would explain gradual improvement, but not the specific technical proficiency we observed. Some of your movements tonight showed muscle memory that takes years to develop. The three upperclassmen exchanged meaningful looks, clearly communicating through some prearranged system. Sarah realized this evaluation had been much more sophisticated than she'd initially assumed. They'd been conducting genuine surveillance and analysis, not just casual hazing. Here's what's going to happen, Mitchell, Bradley said finally. We're going to give you an opportunity to be completely honest with us about your background and capabilities. Because right now, we have concerns about your integrity. And integrity, Johnson added ominously, is fundamental to being a naval officer. Lying about your qualifications or background is a serious offense that could result in dismissal from the academy. Sarah felt the weight of her impossible situation. She couldn't reveal her true background without compromising her mission, but she also couldn't maintain obvious deceptions in the face of direct confrontation. I've told you the truth about my background, she said carefully. I'm a military brat from Ohio whose father served in the Army. I've been around military bases my whole life, which probably gives me some familiarity with military culture and expectations. Familiarity with culture doesn't explain advanced physical capabilities, Martinez countered. What we observed tonight suggests formal training beyond what any civilian would receive. Bradley stood up and began pacing around her chair, a classic interrogation technique designed to create psychological pressure. Let's try a different approach. Tell us about your training before you arrived here. Not just the official preparation program that all incoming plebes complete, but any additional physical or tactical training you might have received. Sarah considered her options carefully. A partial truth might satisfy their curiosity without compromising her mission, but any lie would need to be sustainable under further scrutiny. My father was career military, she said slowly. He believed in preparing his family for the realities of military life. Starting when I was young, he provided additional physical training and taught me basic tactical concepts. Nothing formal, just a father preparing his daughter for the path she'd chosen. The three upperclassmen absorbed this information, clearly evaluating its plausibility. Sarah could see them weighing her explanation against their observations. That's possible, Johnson admitted reluctantly. Military parents sometimes do provide advanced preparation for their children entering service. But it still doesn't fully explain what we've observed, Bradley said firmly. The level of proficiency you've demonstrated suggests training beyond what even a dedicated parent could provide. Sarah maintained her composed expression while internally calculating her next move. These three were more perceptive and thorough than she'd given them credit for, and continuing to underestimate them could compromise everything. The interrogation continued for another hour, with Bradley, Johnson, and Martinez rotating through different approaches designed to break down Sarah's story. They questioned her about specific techniques she'd used during the obstacle course, demanded detailed explanations of her training background, and probed for inconsistencies in her narrative. Through it all, Sarah maintained her carefully constructed persona while providing just enough truth to satisfy their immediate suspicions. When they finally dismissed her back to her room, Sarah knew the dynamic had fundamentally changed. These three upperclassmen were no longer simply hazing a weak plebe. They were actively investigating someone they suspected of deception. The mission had entered a new and more dangerous phase. Over the following days, their surveillance became obvious and constant. Bradley appeared wherever Sarah was training, watching her performances with analytical intensity. Johnson began asking other plebes questions about her behavior and capabilities. Martinez started showing up at meal times, sitting close enough to overhear her conversations. "They're really focused on you lately," Jessica observed one evening as they prepared for bed. "What do you think that's about?" Sarah had been wondering the same thing. Her roommate's innocent question highlighted just how visible their attention had become. "I think they're trying to decide if I'm ready for more advanced training," she said, which was technically true even if it missed the larger reality. "Lucky you," Jessica sighed. "I'd give anything for the upperclassmen to think I was progressing that well. I'm still struggling with basic requirements." That night, Sarah lay awake considering her options. She could continue the current trajectory and hope the 3 upperclassmen's suspicions remained manageable. She could find ways to demonstrate more realistic limitations and convince them they'd been wrong about her capabilities. Or she could begin preparing for the possibility that her cover might be blown and she needed to transition to a different approach. Her contemplation was interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Sarah glanced at her watch, 2:30 in the morning, well past any reasonable time for official business. She moved quietly to the door and opened it to find Bradley standing alone in the corridor. "Mitchell," he said quietly, "we need to talk. Privately." Sarah glanced back at Jessica's sleeping form, then stepped into the hallway, closing the door behind her. Bradley led her through the darkened corridors to a small conference room she'd never seen before, tucked away in an administrative section of the building. "Sit down," Bradley said, but his tone was different now. Less commanding, more conversational, almost respectful. Sarah took a seat across from him at the small conference table, noting that this setting felt much more like a private meeting than an interrogation. Bradley sat down across from her and studied her face in the dim lighting. "I'm going to be direct with you," he said finally. "The 3 of us have been conducting our own investigation into your background. What we found is interesting." Sarah felt her pulse quicken, but kept her expression neutral. "What kind of investigation?" "The kind that involves making calls to contacts who have access to information not available through normal channels," Bradley replied carefully. "The kind that confirms you're not exactly who you claim to be." The moment Sarah had been dreading had apparently arrived. She considered her options rapidly: denial, partial admission, or full revelation. Each carried significant risks to her mission and, potentially, to her safety. "I'm not sure what you think you've discovered," she said evenly. Bradley leaned forward slightly, his expression serious, but not hostile. "We know you're not Sarah Mitchell from Ohio. We know your father was an army station overseas. And we know your background includes training that's significantly more advanced than anything available to civilians." "That's quite a leap based on one evening's evaluation," Sarah replied. "It's not based on one evening," Bradley corrected. "It's based on weeks of observation by 3 people who know what elite military training looks like. And it's based on confirmation that the official records of your background don't match the reality of who you are." Sarah studied his face, looking for signs of what he intended to do with this information. Surprisingly, she saw neither triumph nor hostility. Instead, he looked curious and perhaps even impressed. "What exactly do you think you know?" she asked. "I think," Bradley said slowly, "that you're operating under some kind of cover identity. I think your real background includes military training at a level that far exceeds what any plebe should possess. And I think you're here for reasons that have nothing to do with becoming a standard naval officer." The accuracy of his assessment was both impressive and concerning. Sarah realized she'd significantly underestimated these 3 upperclassmen, treating them as typical academy bullies when they were apparently much more sophisticated in their thinking. "Even if that were true," she said carefully, "why would you care? Why investigate rather than simply reporting your suspicions through official channels?" Bradley smiled for the first time since she'd met him, and it transformed his entire demeanor. "Because Johnson, Martinez, and I aren't exactly standard cadets either. We've all got backgrounds that prepared us for military service in ways that go beyond typical civilian preparation. We recognize advanced training when we see it." This was a development Sarah hadn't anticipated. What kind of backgrounds? Johnson's father was Special Forces, and he provided training that most people would consider extreme for a teenager, Bradley explained. Martinez grew up on a ranch where tactical shooting and survival skills were part of daily life. And my family has 3 generations of military service, including some specialties that aren't exactly public knowledge. So you're suggesting this is some kind of mutual recognition between people with unusual preparations? Sarah asked. I'm suggesting, Bradley said, that we might have more in common than any of us initially realized, and that instead of this adversarial dynamic we've been maintaining, we might be better served by cooperation. Sarah considered this unexpected turn. If these 3 genuinely had advanced backgrounds, they might be valuable allies rather than threats to her mission. But they could also be a complication she wasn't prepared to manage. What exactly are you proposing? She asked. Bradley stood up and moved to the window, looking out at the darkened academy grounds. Here's what I think happened. You're here as part of some kind of assessment program, maybe testing new training methods, maybe evaluating selection criteria, maybe studying how advanced operators adapt to traditional military education. His insight was remarkably close to the truth. Sarah maintained her neutral expression while reassessing everything she thought she knew about this situation. Your presence here, Bradley continued, is probably part of something bigger than just your individual education. And our investigation into your background has probably triggered some kind of attention from whoever is running your program. What makes you think that? Sarah asked. Because yesterday, all 3 of us were approached by different people asking casual questions about our observations and interactions with new plebes. Specifically, questions about whether we'd noticed anyone with unusual capabilities or backgrounds. Sarah felt a chill of concern. If Bradley was correct, then her mission supervisors were already responding to potential compromise of her cover. That suggested they were monitoring the situation much more closely than she'd realized. Approached by whom? People who claimed to be conducting routine assessments of upperclassmen leadership and mentoring capabilities, Bradley said with obvious skepticism. But their questions were too specific and too focused for routine assessment. He turned back to face her directly. Here's what we're proposing. Instead of continuing this game, where we pretend you're a struggling plebe and we pretend to be typical upperclassmen, why don't we acknowledge what's really happening and figure out how to make it work for everyone? And what do you think is really happening? Bradley returned to his seat, leaning forward with obvious intensity. I think you're here to test whether the Academy's current training and evaluation methods can properly identify and develop individuals with exceptional capabilities. I think your mission is to determine whether traditional military education is adequate for producing the kind of officers the modern military needs. And I think, he continued, that our interference with your mission has created complications that serve no one's interests. You need to complete whatever assessment you're conducting, and we need to avoid being labeled as problems by people with clearances above our level. Sarah had to admit his logic was compelling. If these 3 upperclassmen genuinely understood the nature of her mission and were willing to cooperate rather than interfere, it could actually make her job easier. Hypothetically, she said carefully, if your assessment were accurate, what kind of cooperation would you be suggesting? Complete cooperation, Bradley said immediately. We help you maintain whatever cover you need while conducting your real mission. We provide realistic challenges that allow you to demonstrate capabilities without blowing your cover. And we share our own observations about academy training methods and leadership development. In exchange for what? In exchange for the chance to be part of something that might actually improve how the military identifies and develops elite operators, Bradley said with obvious enthusiasm. All 3 of us are planning military careers in specialties that require advanced capabilities. If you're testing new methods, we want to be involved. Sarah studied his expression, looking for signs of deception or hidden agendas. What she saw instead was genuine excitement about the possibility of contributing to military innovation. These 3 weren't just ambitious cadets. They were individuals who genuinely cared about improving military effectiveness. "This is a significant decision," she said finally. "If your assessment of the situation is accurate, then what you're proposing would fundamentally change the nature of my mission here. But it might also make your mission more successful," Bradley countered. "Right now, you're trying to assess academy methods while maintaining a cover that limits your ability to fully engage with the system. Working with us could give you access to perspectives and insights that would otherwise be unavailable." Sarah realized he was probably right. Her current approach required her to observe from the position of someone struggling to adapt, which necessarily limited her understanding of how the system worked for individuals with advanced capabilities. "I need to think about this," she said, "and I probably need to consult with other people." Bradley nodded understandingly. "We figured as much. Take whatever time you need. But understand that our offer comes with a time limit. The longer we maintain the current adversarial dynamic, the more likely it becomes that official attention will focus on all of us in ways that serve no one's interests." He stood up to leave, then paused at the door. "One more thing, Mitchell, or whoever you really are. The three of us have already committed to keeping this conversation confidential regardless of what you decide. We respect what you're trying to accomplish, even if we're not part of it." After he left, Sarah sat alone in the conference room, staring out at the academy grounds and considering everything that had just changed. Her mission had just become significantly more complex, but also potentially much more valuable. For the first time since arriving at the academy, she would need to contact her handlers and request guidance on how to proceed. The three upperclassmen had forced her hand, but they might also have provided an opportunity she hadn't anticipated. Sarah Mitchell, struggling plebe, was about to become someone else entirely. The question was who that someone would be, and whether her real identity could finally emerge from the shadows she'd been hiding in. The next phase of her mission was about to begin, and this time, she wouldn't be working alone. The secure communication with her handlers took place at 0400 hours in a maintenance facility off the academy grounds. Sarah had slipped out during the morning exercise period, using skills that would have been impossible for the Sarah Mitchell persona to possess. The facility was supposedly empty, but she knew her contact would be waiting in the basement office that officially didn't exist. Commander Sarah Chun, her real name and rank, descended the stairs to find Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb seated behind a metal desk that looked like it belonged in a different decade. Webb was her primary handler for this mission, a man whose own background included operations that would never appear in any official record. "Complicated night?" Webb asked without preamble, consulting a tablet that presumably contained reports about her activities. "More complicated than we anticipated," Sarah confirmed, taking the single chair across from his desk. "The three upperclassmen I've been dealing with are significantly more sophisticated than our initial intelligence suggested." Webb looked up from his tablet with sharp attention. "How sophisticated?" "Sophisticated enough to conduct an independent investigation that pierced my cover identity. Sophisticated enough to correctly assess the nature of my mission here. And sophisticated enough to propose cooperation rather than exposure." "That's concerning," Webb said slowly. "Our background checks on those three individuals suggested typical academy high achievers with standard military family connections. Nothing that should have enabled them to penetrate operational security at this level." Sarah leaned forward slightly. "I think our background checks might have been insufficient. Based on what Bradley told me, all three have training and experience that goes significantly beyond what typical civilian preparation would provide." "Explain." Sarah recounted her conversation with Bradley, including his accurate assessment of her mission parameters and his knowledge of surveillance activities that suggested higher-level awareness of the program. Webb listened without interruption, making occasional notes on his tablet. "If he's correct about the casual interviews," Webb said when she finished, "then we've already moved to containment protocols without informing you. That suggests someone above my level decided your cover was compromised, which means we have a decision to make about whether to extract you immediately or modify the mission to accommodate these new variables," Webb replied grimly. "Neither option is ideal, but continuing with the current approach is no longer viable. Sarah had suspected this conversation would lead to mission termination, but she'd hoped to convince Webb that the complications could be turned into advantages. Before you make that decision, consider what Bradley proposed. If these three upperclassmen genuinely have advanced capabilities and are willing to cooperate, they could provide insights into Academy training methods that we'd never get from my original approach. Webb set down his tablet and studied her expression carefully. You're advocating for bringing civilian Academy cadets into a classified assessment program. I'm advocating for recognizing that they might not be as civilian as we initially believed, Sarah countered, and that their voluntary involvement could provide data we wouldn't otherwise be able to collect. Their voluntary involvement would also create security risks and complications that could compromise the entire program, Webb pointed out. These are untested individuals with unknown motivations and unclear loyalties. Sarah had anticipated this objection. Unknown motivations, maybe, but their loyalties seem clear enough. They want to contribute to improving military training and effectiveness. That aligns with our program goals. Webb stood up and began pacing in the small space, a habit Sarah recognized from previous briefings. When he paced, it usually meant he was considering options that went against standard protocol. Even if we accepted the risks, he said finally, bringing them into the program would require approval from levels significantly above my authority. And it would fundamentally change the nature of what we're trying to accomplish here. How? Because instead of testing whether traditional Academy methods can identify exceptional individuals, Webb explained, we'd be testing whether exceptional individuals can work together to improve traditional methods. That's a completely different research question. Sarah considered this distinction, but potentially a more valuable one. If the goal is improving military effectiveness, understanding how advanced operators can contribute to training development might be more important than understanding how they adapt to existing training. Webb stopped pacing and looked at her directly. You really believe these three can contribute meaningfully to the program? I believe they've already demonstrated analytical capabilities and institutional knowledge that exceeded our expectations, Sarah said. And I believe their willingness to cooperate rather than expose suggests the kind of judgment and discretion we'd want in people involved with classified programs. Webb returned to his seat and picked up his tablet again, scrolling through what appeared to be additional reports or communications. There's something else you should know. The casual interviews Bradley mentioned weren't the only indication that your situation had been noticed. What else? 2 days ago, the Academy's commandant received an inquiry from Naval Special Warfare Command about whether there were any special assessment programs currently operating at the Academy, Webb said gravely. The inquiry was supposedly routine, but the timing suggests someone connected the dots between your presence and recent observations about unusual cadet capabilities. Sarah felt a familiar surge of adrenaline. If Naval Special Warfare Command was asking questions, then her mission had definitely attracted attention from people with the authority and capability to investigate thoroughly. What was the response to that inquiry? Official denial, obviously. But the fact that the inquiry was made suggests we have a limited window before someone decides to dig deeper, Webb explained, which is why the decision about how to proceed needs to be made immediately. He stood up again, this time moving to a secure communication device mounted on the wall. I'm going to request an emergency consultation with the program directors. Your assessment of these three upperclassmen, combined with the external attention we're receiving, creates variables that require higher-level decision-making. While Webb initiated his secure communication, Sarah considered the possible outcomes. Best-case scenario, the program directors would authorize expanded cooperation with Bradley, Johnson, and Martinez, allowing her to continue with enhanced support and potentially more valuable research outcomes. Worst-case scenario, immediate extraction and mission termination with possible disciplinary actions against the three upperclassmen who had become involved. The secure communication lasted nearly 30 minutes, during which Sarah could hear Webb's side of what appeared to be multiple conversations with different authority levels. His expressions and tone suggested the discussions were not going entirely as hoped. "Interesting developments," Webb said when he finally ended the communication and returned to his seat. "The program directors are concerned about the security implications, but they're also intrigued by the potential research value of what you're describing. And they want to meet with you and the 3 upperclassmen before making a final decision about how to proceed," Webb continued. "Tomorrow night, after regular academy activities have concluded, all 4 of you will be transported to a secure facility for evaluation and briefing." Sarah felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. The meeting represented an opportunity to continue the mission, but it also meant exposing Bradley, Johnson, and Martinez to levels of scrutiny they probably hadn't anticipated when they offered to cooperate. What kind of evaluation? The kind that determines whether they possess the capabilities, judgment, and security awareness necessary to be involved with a classified research program, Webb said bluntly. They'll be interviewed, tested, and subjected to preliminary background investigations that go significantly deeper than typical academy screening. And if they pass, the mission continues with modified parameters that include their active participation in assessing and potentially improving academy training methods, Webb explained. You would transition from covert observation to overt collaboration, working with them to identify strengths and weaknesses in current approaches. And if they don't pass? Webb's expression became serious. If they don't pass, they'll be debriefed about the sensitivity of what they've encountered, warned about the consequences of disclosure, and monitored for an appropriate period to ensure compliance. Your mission would be terminated, and you'd be reassigned. Sarah nodded, understanding the stakes involved. What do I tell them about tomorrow night? Tell them they're being invited to participate in a special assessment program that could influence future military training development, Webb said. Tell them their cooperation is voluntary, but that participation requires absolute discretion. And tell them that the people they'll be meeting have the authority to either advance their military careers significantly or end them permanently. That should get their attention, Sarah observed. It's intended to. We need to know immediately whether they have the judgment and commitment necessary for this kind of work, Webb said firmly. Because if we proceed with their involvement, there won't be any opportunity to change our minds later. Webb gathered his materials and prepared to leave, but paused at the door. One more thing, Chun. Tomorrow night will also involve a complete assessment of your performance during this mission. The decision to modify the program parameters means evaluating whether your judgment and recommendations are sound. Understood, Sarah replied, though she felt the weight of additional pressure. Her career and future assignments would depend not only on her own performance, but on her assessment of 3 individuals she'd known for only a few weeks. After Webb left, Sarah remained in the basement office for several minutes, contemplating the conversation that had just dramatically changed her mission. Tomorrow night, she would need to convince senior intelligence officials that 3 Academy upperclassmen possessed the capabilities and trustworthiness necessary for involvement in classified research. More importantly, she would need to convince herself that her recommendation was sound, because if she was wrong about Bradley, Johnson, and Martinez, the consequences could extend far beyond her own career. Sarah finally emerged from the maintenance facility and made her way back to the academy, where she would need to convince 3 ambitious cadets to voluntarily submit to evaluation by people whose authority and capabilities they couldn't fully understand. The next 24 hours would determine whether her mission evolved into something unprecedented or ended in ways that none of them had anticipated. Either way, Sarah Chun, not Sarah Mitchell, would finally be operating without a cover identity. For the first time since arriving at the academy, she would be able to reveal exactly who she was and what she was capable of achieving. The question was whether the 3 upperclassmen who had forced this revelation were prepared for the reality of what they'd gotten themselves involved with. Tomorrow night, everyone's true capabilities would be revealed, and there would be no more pretending for anyone involved. The secure facility was located 40 minutes from the academy, hidden within what appeared to be a private corporate training center. Sarah arrived first, transported by Webb in an unmarked vehicle that she recognized as government issue despite its civilian appearance. The building looked like countless conference centers that dotted the landscape around military installations, designed to blend into the background while serving purposes that required discretion. "Remember," Webb said as they approached the entrance, "tonight you're Commander Chun, not Midshipman Mitchell. These people know exactly who you are and what you've accomplished. Don't downplay your capabilities or experience." Sarah nodded, adjusting mentally to operating under her real identity for the first time in months. After weeks of carefully concealing her true nature, the prospect of finally being able to speak and act authentically felt both liberating and slightly disorienting. They were met at the entrance by a woman in civilian clothes who introduced herself simply as Ms. Rodriguez and escorted them through corridors that looked appropriately corporate until they reached a section that clearly served different purposes. Security checkpoints, biometric scanners, and doors marked with classification warnings indicated they'd entered the real facility. "The 3 cadets arrived 10 minutes ago," Rodriguez informed them as they walked. "They're currently being briefed about security requirements and consent procedures. Are you ready to begin the evaluation?" "As ready as possible," Webb replied. "Who else will be participating in the assessment?" "Program Director Harrison is here personally, along with Dr. Kim from the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency and Colonel Martinez from Special Operations Command," Rodriguez said. "This evaluation is being taken very seriously at the highest levels." Sarah felt a spike of nervous energy. She'd expected senior oversight, but the presence of a DARPA representative and a Special Operations Command colonel suggested the potential scope of this program extended far beyond what she'd originally understood. They entered a conference room where 3 individuals in civilian clothes sat at a large table reviewing documents. Sarah recognized none of them personally, but their bearing and the way they commanded the space marked them clearly as senior military leaders operating in civilian cover. "Commander Chun," said the man at the head of the table, rising to shake her hand. "I'm Program Director Harrison. Thank you for your innovative thinking during this mission. Your recommendations have created opportunities we hadn't anticipated." The woman to his left, presumably Dr. Kim, looked up from her tablet. "Your assessment of the 3 upperclassmen was particularly insightful. We're very interested to meet individuals who could penetrate operational security through pure observation and analysis." "Before we bring them in," said the third person, Colonel Martinez, "we want to understand your evaluation of their potential contributions. What specifically do you think they can add to our research objectives?" Sarah took a seat across from them, settling into the formal briefing mode she'd used countless times during her operational career. Bradley, Johnson, and Martinez demonstrated analytical capabilities that exceeded what our initial intelligence suggested was possible from their backgrounds. Their investigation into my cover wasn't amateur curiosity. It was systematic intelligence gathering using techniques that require training or natural aptitude at levels we don't typically see in civilian-educated individuals. More specifically, Dr. Kim Piresit, Bradley showed understanding of operational psychology when he structured our initial conversations to gather maximum information while maintaining plausible deniability. Johnson demonstrated familiarity with surveillance techniques when he began coordinating observation patterns with his colleagues. Martinez showed knowledge of interrogation and assessment protocols during their unofficial evaluation session. Harrison made notes as she spoke. "And you believe these capabilities are genuine, not simply lucky guesses or coincidental behaviors. Their accuracy in assessing my mission parameters suggests either extensive training or exceptional natural ability," Sarah replied. "Either way, those are precisely the qualities this program is designed to identify and develop." Colonel Martinez leaned forward with obvious interest. "What's your assessment of their motivations? Why did they choose cooperation over exposure?" "Because they understand the bigger picture," Sarah said confidently. "They recognized that my presence represented an opportunity to contribute to something more important than individual advancement." That kind of strategic thinking is exactly what we need in future military leaders. Dr. Kim consulted her tablet before looking up. Their preliminary background investigations have revealed some interesting information that supports your assessment. Bradley's family connections include individuals with clearances we initially missed. Johnson's father's Special Forces service involves specialties that would have provided access to advanced training materials. Martinez's family background includes law enforcement and military connections that extend beyond what typical academy screening would identify. So their capabilities aren't entirely surprising in retrospect, Harrison observed. The question is whether those capabilities can be channeled productively within a classified research environment. Webb, who had been silent during this exchange, finally spoke up. The external attention we've been receiving suggests we need to make this decision quickly. Continuing with the current parameters isn't sustainable. Agreed, Harrison said. Let's bring them in and conduct the assessment. Rodriguez, please escort the cadets to the conference room. Sarah felt her pulse quicken as footsteps approached in the corridor. In moments, Bradley, Johnson, and Martinez would enter this room and discover exactly what they'd gotten themselves involved with. Their reactions would determine not only the future of her mission, but potentially the trajectory of their own military careers. The three upperclassmen entered the room with expressions that mixed curiosity, apprehension, and determination. They'd clearly been briefed about the sensitivity of the situation, but Sarah could see they hadn't fully grasped the scope of what they were encountering. "Gentlemen," Harrison said, rising to greet them, "please take seats. I'm Director Harrison, and these are my colleagues Dr. Kim and Colonel Martinez. We understand you've been working with Midshipman Mitchell on some unofficial training assessments." Bradley, who had assumed the role of spokesman for the group, nodded carefully. "Yes, sir. We became interested in her progress and capabilities, and we've been conducting our own evaluations to better understand academy training effectiveness." "That's one way to describe it," Dr. Kim said with what might have been amusement. "We understand your evaluations led to some interesting conclusions about Midshipman Mitchell's background and qualifications." Johnson shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "We observed some inconsistencies that suggested she might have more extensive preparation than typical incoming plebes." "Indeed," Colonel Martinez said dryly. "What you observed was a decorated naval special warfare operator conducting classified assessment research on academy training methods." The silence that followed this revelation was profound. Sarah watched as the three upperclassmen processed information that completely recontextualized everything they thought they understood about their interactions with her. "Sarah Mitchell is actually Commander Sarah Chun," Harrison continued, "a Navy SEAL with operational experience that includes missions you'll never read about in any official records. She's been here to evaluate whether traditional academy training can properly identify and develop individuals with exceptional capabilities." Martinez was the first to find his voice. "So, when we thought we were mentoring a struggling plebe, you were actually conducting surveillance on a decorated special operations officer," Dr. Kim finished. "Which, frankly, is why we're all here tonight." Bradley looked directly at Sarah, his expression mixing embarrassment with something that might have been admiration. "Everything we observed about your capabilities was real. We just completely misunderstood the direction of the deception." "You didn't misunderstand as much as you might think," Sarah replied, speaking in her natural voice and manner for the first time since they'd met. "Your analytical approach and investigative techniques were sophisticated enough to penetrate operational security. That's not something typical academy cadets should be able to accomplish." Harrison consulted his notes before continuing. "Which brings us to why you're here. Commander Chun has recommended that your involvement in this assessment program could provide valuable insights that we wouldn't otherwise be able to obtain. The question is whether you possess the capabilities, judgment, and security awareness necessary for that kind of participation." "What exactly would that participation involve?" Johnson asked. "Full collaboration with Commander Chun in assessing academy training methods, identifying areas for improvement, and developing recommendations for better identification and development of exceptional military talent, Dr. Kim explained. You would essentially become research partners in a classified program designed to revolutionize military education. Colonel Martinez stood up and began pacing, much as Webb had done during their earlier meeting. But participation would also involve extensive background investigations, security clearances, and obligations that would extend far beyond your academy experience. This isn't something you can try out and change your minds about later. What happens if we decline? Bradley asked. Nothing punitive, Harrison assured them. You'll be debriefed about security requirements, reminded about the consequences of disclosure, and return to your normal academy experience. Your interaction with Commander Chun will be officially recorded as a successful mentorship relationship. And if we accept? Martinez asked. If you accept, Dr. Kim said, your remaining academy experience becomes part of a research program that could influence military training for the next generation. Your observations, insights, and recommendations could shape how the military identifies and develops elite operators. Sarah watched their faces as they absorbed this information, looking for signs of how they might respond. Bradley appeared to be calculating possibilities and consequences with characteristic methodical thinking. Johnson seemed excited by the prospect of being involved with cutting-edge research. Martinez looked somewhat overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was being offered. Can we have a few minutes to discuss this? Bradley asked. Of course, Harrison said. Rodriguez will escort you to a private room where you can talk freely. Take whatever time you need, but understand that we'll need your decision tonight. After the three upperclassmen left the room, Harrison turned to Sarah. Your assessment of their initial reactions? Bradley is interested but cautious, which is exactly what we'd want in someone handling classified information, Sarah replied. Johnson is enthusiastic, which could be valuable for motivation, but might require careful management. Martinez is intimidated by the scope, which suggests he understands the seriousness of what's being offered. Overall prognosis? Colonel Martinez asked. I think they'll accept, and I think they'll be valuable contributors, Sarah said confidently. Their investigation of my background demonstrated exactly the kind of analytical thinking and collaborative approach we need for this research. Dr. Kim looked up from her tablet, where she'd been reviewing additional information. Their preliminary background checks came back clean, with some interesting details that support Commander Chen's assessment. All three have connections and experiences that prepared them for this kind of work better than typical academy cadets. 20 minutes later, the three upperclassmen returned with expressions that suggested they'd reached consensus. Bradley, as expected, served as their spokesman. We've discussed the opportunity you've presented, he said formally, and we're honored to be considered for participation in this program. We accept, with the understanding that we're committing to obligations that extend beyond our current comprehension. Harrison smiled, the first genuinely pleased expression Sarah had seen from him all evening. Outstanding. Dr. Kim will coordinate your security processing, which begins immediately. Colonel Martinez will oversee your integration with Commander Chen's research activities. And I'll be monitoring your progress personally to ensure this expanded program meets its objectives. What happens next? Johnson asked. Next, Sarah said, standing up and extending her hand to Bradley, we start working together to figure out how the Naval Academy can better identify and develop people like us. Your investigation skills, combined with my operational experience, should provide insights that neither of us could generate alone. As they shook hands, Bradley smiled with what appeared to be genuine excitement. This is going to be significantly more interesting than we anticipated when we first decided to investigate the new girl who seemed too capable for her cover story. Much more interesting, Sarah agreed, and potentially much more important for the future of military training and development. 6 months later, their collaborative assessment would result in recommendations that revolutionized how the military identified exceptional individuals and prepared them for elite service. The program that began with 3 upperclassmen cornering someone they thought was a struggling plebe evolved into a model for developing the next generation of special operations leaders. And Sarah Chun, no longer hiding behind the facade of Sarah Mitchell, could finally use her full capabilities in service of making the military more effective at recognizing and developing the kind of exceptional individuals who would define the future of American defense capabilities.